So let's get started. Thank you everyone for coming. This is live streaming in Power BI. So actually, first before I start with my presentation, just quick show of hands, how many of you guys have actually played around with streaming data sets in Power BI? Okay, so a few of you. So with this presentation, what I'm going to want to do is just take you through a tour of streaming data sets in Power BI. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit, go into a lot of detail about how this actually works. We're going to go into the nuts and bolts of things. And really the goal is to give you guys a lay of the land, an understanding of what tools exist and what you can build in terms of real-time streaming with Power BI. So what I've done here is to start the presentation, I've actually built out a nice little sample dashboard just to show you what is kind of possible with this sort of technology. And so what you see here is we have a dashboard in Power BI, and I'm pushing data to it, and really as quickly as I can push data to it, the dashboard is able to update with that data. And what you'll see is there's these nice animations in that line chart there, and I can even import a video, right? So I'm kind of cheating here. I brought in a YouTube video, but you can get a sense of what it might look like if this were an actual real-time video, and you can pipe that onto your dashboard as well. And so we're really excited with Power BI that we're able to deliver this kind of real-time capability. It's something that very few of our competitors, if any of them, can really match. And so this is kind of the end goal of what I'll be talking about today. So with that, I'm actually going to switch over to my slides. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So like I said, really the goal is to help you guys have a lay of the land to get to that end product that I just showed you there. And again, I'm sorry for starting a little bit late. And so the first thing that we want to talk about is really what are the different types of streaming data sets in Power BI, right? There's actually a few different options that you can pick. The options are not mutually exclusive, but they are options. And so it's really good heading into this to understand what kind of tools there are, right? And so at a high level, there's kind of three data pipelines when it comes to streaming data sets. There's push, there's streaming, and there's Power BI. So these are the actual pipelines that you're going to be pushing data into. And that's what I'm going to talk about first. I'm not going to talk about how you actually push data into it, and you'll see later why I'm kind of bifurcating the presentation that way. They're two kind of separate concepts, even though the terminologies get a little mixed, so it can be potentially confusing. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is push. And here again, I'm going to go into deeper detail than I think has ever been gone into before as far as how these data pipelines work. So push is a pipeline. It's going to be kind of the workhorse, right? It's going to be the thing that you're probably going to be using most often when it comes to real-time data sets. And how it works is, data comes in. We're going to abstract away how the data comes in. But when you create this push data set, when you create this push endpoint, what we actually do for you in the Power BI service behind the scenes is provision an Azure SQL instance for you, believe it or not. So you go into the UI or you go into our REST API and you create a push data set, and we've actually gone ahead and provisioned Azure SQL. And anytime data is pushed into that endpoint, right, we store it in Azure SQL. And then anytime, at the same time, we trigger a dashboard refresh with it in the Power BI service. And the Power BI service is actually connecting to Azure SQL via direct query. So right, it's actually, from the Power BI service point of view, it's no different than if you just took Power BI service and you connected via direct query to Azure SQL or SQL Server, right? But all of this happens underneath the covers. What all you see as the developer, as the end user, is that you just created a push data set. And so what we're able to do is update that data very, very quickly as soon as the data is pushed in, right? We make the direct query request, we update your dashboards, et cetera. But it's actually going to be a little less quickly than what you'll see with some of the other visual types because you have to go through that direct query, right? So you have to make these live SQL queries to Azure SQL, and SQL is going to have to return. Yeah, that's the three data points we have here. But let me talk about the advantages of this push data set, right? And so this is, like I mentioned, this is direct query. And so you can build reports against it. You can use custom visuals, Q&A, alerts, basically the full richness of the Power BI service and desktop, as we'll see in a second, is actually going to be available to you when you connect to these kind of data sets. Right? And so that's going to be the huge, huge advantage. And what we're going to see is that actually it turns out some of the other streaming data set pipelines are not going to offer that. The caveats are, you might see a little bit slower updates in terms of when you push the data in and when you actually see that data appear on your dashboard. And that's just going to be because of that direct query that I mentioned. And when I say slower, I mean, this is still very much real time. So you're going to see this data still update, at the very least every 4 to 5 seconds. So it should be quick enough. We go out and talk to customers. It should be quick enough for most of your use cases. But I just want to call out that in terms of the streaming data set feature set that we have, this is actually the slowest one, right? The second caveat here is that we just have some API throttling limitations. And so what you'll see is if you start sending data into the pipeline, if you send too many requests or if your requests are too large, we're just going to have to throttle you. And again, that's just because we want to make sure that everyone using these push data sets has a good experience. And one way we unfortunately have to do that is limit what individual users can do. But again, this is actually, these throttles are fairly high. And what we've seen is that they're far beyond what you would typically expect or what you would typically need for most use cases. And so as far as the push data set goes, you can actually add data to it once every second. And the maximum data size is going to be 16 megabytes per request. So it's actually, it's a lot of data, right? And so in terms of when to use this, right, this is really our workhorse, right? Because you can build reports against it, custom visuals, the works, we really see this is really the place to start when it comes to your real-time functionality. And we'll talk about how to build these data sets, et cetera, later. But really, this should be the first thing on your mind if you have a real-time use case and you want to start using it, right? And below, of course, you have that 3 to 5 second latency. So if you're really doing something where you need absolutely the latest data, which we don't really see very often, like 1 second, 2 second, you might want to look elsewhere. And of course, if you have kind of these advanced reporting needs, if you need to build reports against this content, et cetera, that's push is what you're going to use. So next, we'll talk about streaming. So streaming as a data pipeline actually works as follows, right? So here, your data comes in, and it actually goes to a Redis cache. So Redis is a very performant web caching tool, or just caching tool in general. That's also going to be auto-provisioned for you in the Power BI service. And then whenever you go onto a dashboard and you build this visual based on the streaming data set, the visual is going to be constantly querying that cache. Now notice what's not happening here is you're not actually connecting to a database. Analysis services, which tends to run in the Power BI service against most data sets, is actually not running here. And so what you're not going to get is the ability to build these report visuals, custom visuals, things like that. You're unfortunately going to be limited to just a set of streaming visuals that are designed to go off and query that Redis cache. But what you are going to get, let me just flick to the advantages real quick, is actually really, really, really fast latencies, right? Redis is very, very performant. It tends to give you very consistent refresh rates of around 1 second between when you push data in and when you see that appear on a dashboard. In fact, the demo that I showed, just to flip over, is actually, did that flip over? It didn't flip over, that's weird. But anyway, you remember the demo. That actually is built on a streaming visual. The other nice thing is that these streaming visuals, because they were built solely for the purpose of real time, there's just some visual improvements we can do, right? You get those animations that kind of tween between one data point and the other, and they're actually it's going to be very easy to build some of the really important real time visuals. And what we'll see in a minute is that you can actually use both push and streaming together, right? You actually don't have to choose one or the other. And so what we see a lot is people using the push side of the house to build these nice reports, but then use the streaming side of the house to have these really great visuals. And I'll show you that in a second. So when to use this one, I think, is when the streaming visual works for one of your use cases, because it has those nice animations, you can pull those into your dashboard even if you're using push for other things. And also be in the rare cases where you really want the absolute latest data, 3 or 5 seconds doesn't work for you, streaming is also going to be the way to go. So next. So finally, we have PubNub. So PubNub is actually a great company based in Silicon Valley that we've had the opportunity to partner with. And PubNub, really, their bread and butter is data streaming, right? So PubNub enables you to build these data streams. You easily push data into those streams, and then you can use a PubNub SDK to really get data back from those streams or get the data from that stream from any application, right? And so the Power BI service, what we've done is we've integrated with the PubNub SDK. So when you create a PubNub dataset in the Power BI service, what you're doing is you're not actually creating the PubNub stream, the thing at the top. You're just creating a linkage to that stream using the SDK. Right? And then anytime you build a visual using that PubNub stream, what you actually do is you have that SDK query the stream in real time and pull down that data. And so you'll see with the visuals that you get a lot of the advantages of streaming, right? You still have these visuals that are optimized for really quick response times. They're easy to build, but unfortunately, because the data lives in PubNub, there also is not an analysis services instance running. You can't, unfortunately, build reports off of it, et cetera. And so really, the advantages are quite similar to streaming, right? So if you need really up-to-date data, if you need visuals optimized for real-time scenarios, go with PubNub. Obviously, if your data already is in PubNub, go with this. But unfortunately, right, you can't build reports on this type of data set. And also, unlike streaming, your data isn't going into any like SQL database or what have you. And so just be cognizant of that. Right? So those are the three types of endpoints, right? There's push, there's streaming, and there's PubNub. And so now we can talk about how do we push data in, right? But I think it's important to call out, once again, that really regardless of how you push data in, at the end of the day, your data is going through one of those three pipelines. Right? And so the first thing we can talk about are the Power BI REST APIs. So how many of you have actually tried out the Power BI REST APIs? All right, small set of the room, cool. And so the Power BI REST APIs are going to sit on top of these different types of data sets. And they're going to allow you to push into, send data to either a push data set and or a streaming data set. So you'll see you can actually have the, you can actually do either or. And so you make one API call, and when you create the data set, you say, hey, is this underlying pipeline going to be push, inclusive or streaming? Right? And then once you've created that data set, the one API call will go into one or the other. And so from the REST APIs, you get this really powerful tool to be able to start sending data in to the Power BI streaming data sets. And actually from here, there's two further options you have when it comes to the REST APIs. In case you weren't confused enough already, there's going to be programmatic creation, so you can programmatically create these data sets, or you can actually build them through the UI. And so we're going to talk about programmatic creation of these data sets first, right? And so this is really, the best practice here is that if you really want full control over how data is being pushed in and how Power BI handles that data, you're going to want to create your data sets programmatically instead of relying on the UI. This is the most flexible way to do it. This is the most secure way to do it, right? And so I'm going to show you how you actually do it. This is a breakout session, so we're going to actually show the HTTP request here. So you just basically send a post request to the dataset's endpoint. And the one thing I want to call out first is in the header, you'll notice you need an AAD token to do this. So when you programmatically create this dataset, you're going to need an AAD token. And the same goes for when you push data into that dataset. And so this is actually secured by AAD, and so it's going to be you're going to get all the advantages of AAD auth, that's used pretty much everywhere else in the Microsoft ecosystem. And that's going to be a big differentiator compared to what you'll see happen in the UI creation of this data set. And in the body, I think it's pretty straightforward. You give the data set a name, right? It's in the JSON there. And then you just call out what tables you need, you want to create. Column names for the tables, et cetera. And then there's two really interesting flags below that I want to talk about. There's our default mode flag. So I'm going to lift the jargon a little bit, right? Default mode means which one of those two different endpoints do you want to send your data to, right? We saw those two data sets there. So if default mode is set to push, it's going to only send your data to a push data set. If your default mode is streaming, only streaming. And of course, push streaming is going to send your data to both of those endpoints at the same time, right? And so really, people often ask, why do we even need to worry about this flag? Why not just do this always? We don't really have a good answer to that. It's really just timing. Yeah, so really, I mean, there's very few drawbacks to going with an approach like this. You're probably going to want to default to push streaming. Unless, maybe one example I could think of is maybe you don't want this data to be stored long term, in which case with a streaming data set, we actually throw away that data after an hour. So maybe that's one example. Okay. With the REST APIs as well, there's a second flag that's very important, which is the retention policy flag. And so this flag dictates how your data is retained in the Power BI service. And this flag actually, it turns out, is only relevant for push. It only dictates what happens with that push pipeline. So with the retention policy flag, you actually get two options, basic FIFO, and I think the other one's called normal, or it's in the API docs. So basic FIFO means we actually, it's just first in, first out, and with a cap of 200,000 rows. So as you push in data, you're going to keep pushing in until you hit 200,000 rows. And then once you hit 200,000 rows, it's a circular queue, right? So the first data that you push in is going to start falling out. So this is the one that we honestly see the most often people use. If you have just a process where it's important to keep track of the last, I don't know, week or whatever amount of data, and then you're okay with the data falling out at the end, that's the one we suggest. With the other option, what you'll get is a limit of 5 million rows. But once you hit those 5 million rows, unfortunately, the data is you're just going to get an error from the endpoint. And of course, there are tools available to clear the data that you already have, but you're going to be kind of manually managing that process. And so again, if we were going to go with the defaults, there's a reason we put this up here. Default mode, push streaming, and retention policy, basic FIFO. So you're going to want to make sure you do that. Now, pushing to the data sets, once you've created it, is fairly straightforward, right? So what you're going to do is send another post request to the particular data set, to the particular table, to the rows endpoint of that. These slides are up, so you can take a look later. And here again, if you programmatically create this data set, you're going to need to attach your AAD auth token. And there are great code samples online which show you how to do that. And then basically you just say, hey, I want to push in these rows. This value, this value, this value. And the data is going to flow in. And then once you build a visual on that, that visual is going to automatically update every time you push that in, right? So it's a really fairly easy way to go ahead and start playing around with the visuals in real time. And I'll show you guys a demo of that at the end. So next, when it comes to the Power BI REST APIs, you can also push them in. You can also create these data sets using the UI. And so this is actually a much, much faster way to go do it, especially if you're not comfortable writing all that code. And really, this endpoint gives you less flexibility, but the trade-off is you're going to be able to start going with this right away. Right? And so here what we have is you go into the UI, create a new streaming data set. That's the left part. And on the right part, you just basically say, hey, these are my fields. Right? Here I'm adding a timestamp and a country of origin and occurrences. This is like a fraud detection demo. And you'll see that we just start building the sample JSON that you have to send in below. And then at the very bottom, you get a little checkbox, which is called historic data analysis. Kind of a confusing term, but really what it means is, hey, what do you want your default mode flag to be? Right? So that's the flag we talked about earlier. If you turn that on, it's push streaming, so it goes to both. It's kind of the default that we like. But if you turn it off, it's just streaming. So it's not going to remember. You're only going to be able to use those streaming visuals, right? And the retention mode flag that we just talked about, that's always going to be set to basic FIFO. Unfortunately, you don't really get a say in the matter when it comes to the UI. The one other key difference for the data sets that are created from the UI is as follows. This is a sample request for how you actually push data in, and what you'll notice is that you don't need an AAD access token, right? They can be kind of ornery to get. You often have to rely on AAD's libraries, and so with this method, you don't need one. That's what I've commented there. All you really do is send a row key. You can see at the end of the URL there, and that row key is going to allow you just straight direct access to start pushing data in. And so like I said before, this is really going to be a quick way to start prototyping out your data sets. But just be aware that it's a little less secure, right? Anyone that gets access to that URL is going to be able to start pushing data in. So another big thing that we find people do is use our Azure Stream Analytics integration. So how many people here have actually heard of Azure Stream Analytics? All right, a bit more of the room. So Azure Stream Analytics is actually a really, really cool tool that we have in the Azure platform. And what it's going to do is it takes in a bunch of inputs, from wherever, maybe IoT Hub, or you have a bunch of devices pushing data in. It can do processing and aggregation on those inputs. So basically, you can say, hey, let's say you have a sensor. It pushes in a data point every millisecond or something. And you can have Azure Stream Analytics aggregate that in real time and say, hey, I just want the average, or I just want the max over 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? So it's a really powerful tool to start working with your data and to start aggregating it. You can do joins, and so maybe you have some other reference database that kind of gives you a friendly name for the IoT sensor or what have you. And so it's a really powerful tool for doing that. So it takes some outputs, and then it also has, it takes some inputs, and it also has a bunch of outputs. And one of the outputs happens to be Power BI. So another example of an output might be Azure SQL, for example. So I can just push all that data into a SQL database, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But separately, one of the outputs is Power BI. And a lot of people say, hey, when you set up that output, it kind of feels like magic. It just creates a data set in Power BI, and you can start playing around with it. But I want to actually lift up the covers for a second. What Azure Stream Analytics is really doing is just calling the Power BI REST APIs for you. So it's just an easy way to go ahead and start calling those APIs without the need to obviously build that yourself or create it in the UI even. Right? And then in turn, it's automatically setting some of those flags for you as well. But it's thankfully setting the flags in the right way. It's setting them to kind of the optimal defaults that we talked about earlier. So it's going to be pushing that data into both the push data set, the push pipeline, and the streaming pipeline, right? And then it's also going to be using the basic FIFO flag. And of course, the requests between Azure Stream Analytics and Power BI are going to be secured with AAD auth. You kind of set that up when you set up the output with Azure Stream Analytics. But at the end of the day, it is also secured with AAD auth. But what that means is, right, let's say you have a ton of data, and you don't want that to go into Power BI as is. You don't want to go in raw, because maybe you just have too much to visualize, it's too noisy, what have you. Really the guidance there, and this actually happens to be the guidance that we give probably 85% of the time, is you'll probably want to send your data into Azure Stream Analytics first, clean it up, aggregate it, and then when you have it ready for display, then send it to Power BI. And of course, Azure Stream Analytics is really great because you can create a bunch of different outputs at the same time on the same data, right? So you could send, on one hand, the data that's meant for display to Power BI, and then on the other hand, you could send, maybe your raw data over to a database or a data warehouse or something like that. Not data warehouse, data lake. And so you really have that flexibility to really do whatever you want with your outputs. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is Flow. So actually, how many of you have heard of Microsoft Flow? Oh, more of the room. Awesome. Yeah, so Flow, in case for those of you who haven't heard of it, is this amazing tool that Microsoft just released, which allows, basically, I think the best way to describe it is the connective tissue between all the different services that not only Microsoft maintains, but a bunch of third-party services as well. And so basically, when you create a flow, you give it a bunch of triggers, right? Like say, when I receive an email, or when this data alert in Power BI fires. And you give it a bunch of actions. For example, send me an email, or send someone else an email, or something like that. So that's at a high level how Flow works. Now, the Flow team recently, we've worked with the Flow team to create a Power BI action in Flow. And that's going to actually push to the Power BI REST API as well. So in this case, you can actually take any of the data sources, any of the events that Flow supports, right? Like when a file is added, or when there's a Slack alert, or when there's a Microsoft Teams alert. And you can use that to trigger a flow. And in turn, that flow can push rows into a Power BI data set. And so you can imagine all the possibilities there, right? One demo that gets demoed a lot, hopefully, maybe we'll have time for it, is what you can do is you can have Flow pick up Twitter feed, pick up a particular Twitter feed, run that into Azure Cognitive Services to identify the sentiment of the flow, and then push that out to Power BI. And in doing so, you'll create a chart in Power BI of the Twitter sentiment of a particular set of keywords. And that, obviously that chart, because it's based on a push data set or a streaming data set, will update in real time. And so just a super easy way, super powerful way to actually start getting that, just the full power of the Microsoft Cloud. And you can set it up really quickly as well. So in this case, Flow, right, when to use it. Flow is really easy to set up, and so it's good for a lot of these prototyping scenarios. Maybe you're not, maybe you're just trying to build a proof of concept. Flow is going to handle calling the APIs for you. It's going to do a lot of the maintenance work, and so that's a huge advantage with Flow. And the other option, of course, or the other positive with Flow, of course, is that Flow connects already with hundreds of different data sources. So if you see any of these actions in Flow that you'd want to integrate with, that you want to keep track of, you can go ahead and do that instead of writing your own script or writing your own job or what have you. And so those are really the two main times to use Flow. The other thing I want to call out too is that Flow is just, they move really quickly, just like Power BI. So they're always adding additional connectors, additional sources, et cetera. And finally, there's PubNub, which kind of, it's kind of its own thing. So like I mentioned before, when you create a PubNub stream, you create a PubNub stream first, and that actually, what you're going to do there is outside of the PowerBI.com ecosystem. You're just going to go to pubnub.com, create a stream. They do make it very easy for you to do that. And then you're going to push data into that stream. They also make it very easy to do that, but that's also going to happen outside of Power BI. You can just call their APIs, and they have a number of ways of authenticating and making sure that only people who are supposed to call add data to the stream do it. And then when you create this Power BI data set, it's going to create that connection using the SDK between Power BI and the stream that you've built outside of Power BI, and it's going to go ahead and start displaying that data. Right. Okay, so now at this point, session code here. Clearly, I forgot that. At this point, we're going to talk about some best practices, and I'm going to show you a few demos, right? And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is when it comes to the Power BI real-time data sets, you're going to want to reduce your data volume that comes in, right? So with the real-time streaming data sets, there are unfortunately going to be some limits to the volume of data that you can place in. The limits are high, but in general, the guidance is you're only going to want to push in the data that you want to display in real time, right? If you push in too much data, you might not see great performance on your dashboards, or separately, you just might get throttled. But that doesn't mean you can't actually, there are other options if you want to do long-term analysis with a greater set of data, right? For example, what you could do is you could push in a set of data to Power BI that you want to display in real time, but separately, you could push in even more data, maybe in an unaggregated form to a database or what have you, and then connect Power BI to that database through the more traditional methods, right? Import or direct query, live connection, et cetera. And in that case, what you're doing then is you're going to have the long-term analysis using Power BI as well as the real-time capabilities. They're just kind of in separate streams, and that's really how we designed the system, right? We don't yet support simultaneously pushing a ton of data and also showing real-time data on top of that, right? So that's the second data point, and yeah, just again, be aware of the data volume limits. And of course, those limits, they're on the REST API, which means that in turn, they really affect any upstream sources, right? So Azure Stream Analytics pushes to the REST API. If your aggregation in Azure Stream Analytics isn't good or non-existent, like if you're just sending too much data, Azure Stream Analytics will hit those throttles, and at the same and as a result, that job will fail, and so right, it affects the upstream dependencies as well. So now I'm going to actually give you a demo, and I'm going to change things up a bit on the fly to actually go. So originally my demo was it started a little more in depth, but because I see that a lot of you haven't actually seen how the setup works, I'm actually going to start just kind of further back in time. So what I'll do is, hopefully now I can get, Okay. All right, so this is finally the dashboard that I showed you guys earlier on. So what I'm going to do is actually going to create a new dashboard and walk you guys through the steps for actually seeing real-time data populate. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just create a dashboard. So this will be the home for the real-time streaming tiles that I'm going to create. So I'm going to call this real-time demo over here. And then what I'll do now is actually add a streaming data set. So create streaming data set. So this is the UI path for creating your real-time data sets. And you'll see here I have two options, right? Call the REST API or go through PubNub. In this case, I'm just going to go through the REST API. Right? And so here I can actually choose the data set name. So I'm just going to, it doesn't really matter. So I'll just be demo, MDIS 2017. And here, values from a stream. So now what I'm able to do is just go ahead and say, hey, these are the different values I want, right? And so what I'll do is you should almost always add a timestamp. And I'm just going to match the script that I've wrote. So in this particular example, say what I'm doing is detecting fraud events that happen in real time, right? So maybe I'm a telecommunications company. I want to detect when people are frauding me by, I don't know, using multiple cracked SIM cards or something like that. So I'm going to have total events. So maybe this is something like total calls, possible fraud events, and then certain fraud events. And of course, you can put whatever fields in here that you'd like. And at this point, I'm just going to turn this historic data analysis switch on. And again, this is going to cause me to push to both the push and the streaming endpoints. And I'm going to hit create. And actually, just like that, we're done, right? So we've created the streaming data set now, and it's ready to start receiving that data. And so what you'll see is it actually spits out this nice URL that I can start pushing to. And like I mentioned before, this is all you need to start pushing into it. You don't need to authenticate or anything. And below, it actually gives me a nice little sample of the JSON I have to include in the body, right? So this is how I start pushing data in. And of course, at this point, I mean, this is just an HTTP request, right? I just have to send an HTTP request, a POST request somehow to that endpoint. So we actually go ahead and make it a little easier to get started. So there's a curl sample code over here through PowerShell as well. But what I have, and of course, I could use any of the dozens of tools available online to go ahead and start pushing that data in. What I've written ahead of time is actually a script to do this. So this is just a pretty simple Python script. All it does is call that endpoint over and over and over again with some fake data. And all I'm going to do here is just paste in that URL that I copied, right? And this sample script, by the way, is available online. We have a blog post called tutorial for building an IoT real-time dashboard, and that actually links to a GitHub which has this script. So if you want to get a jump start on it that way, feel free to do so. I won't dwell on the code too long. It's just a simple HTTP request. But I'm just going to go ahead and start sending that data over. So I'm just running the script, and you'll see that we're sending these over, and we're getting an HTTP 200 back. And so now the data is flowing in, right? Just really quickly, I've been able to push that data in. And so what I can do from here is, if I can find that data set, where did I create that data set? Is it here? Is it in the MDIS? Sorry, guys. I've forgotten where I created that data set. Does anyone remember? Okay, you know what? I really apologize for that. I'm just going to do it again. This is why you should always practice your demos. But this is also how you know that this demo is happening live, is because this is not a video. I'm going to do this one more time. I really apologize. So maybe I'll name it my own name so I won't forget it this time. Give it a timestamp. And again, show you guys how quick I'm going to be able to do this. Number, certain fraud events, number. Create. Yeah, I should have checked that box, huh? Now, the nice thing about this, actually, is that you can go in and check this box afterwards. So it's as if I planned that. All right, here we go. Grab this URL, go back here, add it in, and okay, save. I'm pushing into the wrong data set now, so I'll just restart the script. And it's right here, right in the MDIS workspace. Okay, so perfect. So the first thing I can demo, now this data set is actually being pushed into both push and streaming, right? So I'm going to demonstrate each in turn. And so the first thing I can demonstrate is our streaming visuals, right? And so I'm just going to create a new dashboard. And from here, now the first thing I'm going to add are these streaming visuals, right? So streaming visuals, again, they tap into that Redis cache that we're now pushing to, but they don't allow report creation. So you actually have to create them directly from a dashboard. And here, what I'll see is I go and I went to create a new streaming visual, and now it's asking me, hey, which data set do you want to pluck from? So I'll pick this one. And now I see I have a bunch of different visual types that I can choose from. Now remember, you can't create a report off of these, but you can choose from any of these different data sets, visualization types. And so I can go ahead and just grab that card in. And what I can do is it says, hey, these are your fields, right? These are the fields that you can display. So I'll just go ahead and display one. And hey, here's total events or certain fraud events. Give it a name, and bam, I've actually gone ahead and created it there. And so hopefully what you'll see if my script updates is that this data is updating in real time. That one seems to be struggling a little bit, so let me create another one. And this time, I'll show you guys how to create a line chart, and actually, there it goes. It just updated. And here you can see I can easily put in the timestamp for the axis. Oops, not the legend. And as a value, I can say, hey, total events. How many total events are being pushed into the system? I can hit apply, and hopefully, as I push more data in, what you'll see is a nice line chart appearing over there. Maybe this is because of internet issues. Trust me, I do this all the time. This might sound a little cheesy, but this usually works without a hiccup. So I'm not sure what's going on here. It's probably one of the more suspenseful demos you'll see at this conference. All right, well, you know what? We're going to come back to this one later. The other thing I want to show you guys is how you can actually build a report off of this, right? So you push to, we're pushing to both of these endpoints. The push endpoint, right, we've created Azure SQL instance for you, and you're going to be able to directly connect to that Azure SQL instance and create a report off of it. And so what I went there, just actually I'm going to replay that, gone ahead and clicked on the Create Report button. And here what you'll see is I have a nice report building experience now for the data that's being pushed in, and I can actually just work with it here. And so what I could do again is create a line chart with timestamp and possible fraud events. And actually here you'll see the data is populating, and I can just quickly create a line chart. Not a pretty line chart because this is random data and it's just a random number generator. But of course, I have all those powerful tools at my disposal, right, to start building. I can change the report color and et cetera. Now, another really great thing about push data sets, by the way, and this is a new feature that we've just released, is that you can actually connect these to Power BI Desktop. And this is actually new with the June release of Power BI Desktop. So what I can do is I can just come in here. I'm just going to create a new Power BI Desktop file. And in past months, we've released the live connection to Power BI service feature in the desktop, which allows you to live connect to a data set that you uploaded to the service. With the first version of that feature, we actually weren't able to connect to real-time data sets. But it turns out in the latest version of the Power BI Desktop, you can do that. And so what I'll do over here is bring up the different workspaces I have in the service. I'll go ahead and, actually, sorry, it turns out I'm the wrong account. So I'll go ahead and switch over. So what you'll see in a second, once I sign in, is that I'm actually able to connect to that real-time data set and build a report off of that in the Power BI Desktop, which is just, if you're more familiar with the desktop or if you want to leverage any of the new desktop tools that are coming out, you can go ahead and do that. So here I'll go in and I'll load that data set, that streaming data set that I just created. And you'll see that nice schema that I created on the fly appears here. And again, I can create these visuals. And now the really great thing about desktop is we have a number of powerful tools. We're obviously constantly updating it, but we have a number of powerful tools on top of this that that address a lot of our big asks with real time, right? So for example, one thing you can do with desktop is create a report measure. And so despite the fact that in the service you can't build additional measures on top of your real-time data sets, you're going to be able to do that going forward in the desktop. And of course, once you've built these measures out, so for example here, I'm not going to show it, but you could create something that, adding the certain fraud events and the possible fraud events for like a total potential fraud events. You could publish that back into the service, pin those tiles back onto a dashboard, and actually see that update in real time as well. So it's going to be just a really powerful tool. And of course, hopping back into the service here, I'm just going to go ahead and, so what you'll notice is when I build this report here, the reports themselves are unfortunately not equipped to actually to start updating in real time. So your creation experience is going to be against just whatever static data that you happen to have when the report was first loaded. But if you do pin that to a dashboard, let me just save this report real quick. We'll just go to new dashboard. If you do pin that to a dashboard, and hey, actually here we see the streaming visual come back, what you'll see is that both of these visuals should be updating in real time as my data comes in. Looks like it's not behaving today. But take my word for it, I guess. Well, that is a bug, maybe due to internet connection, I'm not sure. But at least what you've seen here is how quickly it is to get started with the real-time streaming feature set and to go ahead and start creating these reports. I invite you all to go ahead and actually go and try this yourself. And if you have any issues, please let me know. Hopefully you won't run into this set of issues here. And so just to close, we do have a bunch of great resources for you as well, a bunch of walkthroughs. So this deck will be up online. You can go read through these. There's a bunch of great tutorials on how you can actually start building these visuals, how you can connect to Azure Stream Analytics, and et cetera. Okay? Thank you very much.